My name is Yvonne, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally made it. A software engineer in Boston with a $630,000 condo that I purchased after a decade of 60-hour work weeks. I was excited to spend Christmas with my family and share news about my potential promotion. My sister Amanda was struggling financially since her husband lost his job with 3 kids to support. What I never expected was to overhear my parents whispering about moving her entire family into my home permanently without my permission. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment where you are watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned the tables on my family's betrayal. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood just outside Boston. Our house was modest but comfortable, with 4 bedrooms and a small backyard where we would have summer barbecues. From an early age, it was clear that Amanda and I occupied very different roles in our family. I was the responsible one, the planner, the achiever. Amanda was the favorite, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose mistakes were always forgiven. Growing up, I was the student who stayed up until midnight studying, who joined every academic club, who worked part-time jobs on weekends to save for college. Amanda was the social butterfly who barely passed her classes and spent more time at parties than in the library. When it came time for college, I earned scholarships that covered about half my tuition. The rest came from student loans that I took out myself, determined to make my own way. My parents helped when they could, but money was always tight. Amanda, on the other hand, started at a state school but dropped out after 3 semesters. She claimed college was too stressful and not the right path for her. Instead of insisting she find a job or alternative education, my parents simply welcomed her back home. Over the years, I watched as my parents financially supported Amanda through one bad decision after another. There was the time she wanted to start a photography business, so they bought her an expensive camera and equipment that gathered dust within months. Then came her jewelry-making phase, her attempt at becoming a social media influencer, and various multi-level marketing schemes. Each time my parents opened their wallets while I bit my tongue. Meanwhile, I finished my computer science degree, landed an entry-level job at a tech company, and began my career. I lived with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment, eating ramen noodles and store-brand cereal to save money. I took the bus instead of owning a car. I tracked every dollar in a spreadsheet and invested what I could. I worked overtime, took on extra projects, and gradually climbed the corporate ladder. 10 years of this discipline finally paid off when I was able to put a down payment on my dream condo. Located in a historic building that had been beautifully renovated, it featured high ceilings, hardwood floors, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. It had 2 bedrooms, one of which I converted into a home office, and a spacious living area perfect for entertaining. The kitchen was a chef's dream with marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. I spent months carefully selecting furniture and decorations that reflected my personality. The living room couch was a splurge, but I justified it because I wanted something both beautiful and comfortable where I could relax after long workdays. I hung artwork from local artists I had discovered at weekend markets. My bookshelves were filled with novels and technical books I had collected over the years. Every corner of that condo represented my journey, my sacrifices, and my achievements. Despite my success, my parents continued to see me primarily as a resource for Amanda. When she needed a car, my father called to ask if I could co-sign the loan. When her first child was born, my mother hinted that I should help with the hospital bills. When her husband James lost his job at a construction company last year, my parents suggested I could offer them a loan until he found something else. I had always been generous despite feeling taken for granted. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts for the kids. I contributed to their school fundraisers. I even paid for a family vacation to Cape Cod last summer, wanting my nieces and nephew to experience the beach trips I had loved as a child. But as my career demands increased, I found myself spending less time with my family. Video calls replaced visits. Text messages replaced phone conversations. The distance grew not just physically but emotionally. I sensed disapproval from my parents when I missed a family dinner for a work emergency or when I had to cut short a weekend visit to prepare for a Monday presentation. Still, I looked forward to Christmas this year. I had taken a full week off work, my first real vacation in months. I had shopped carefully for thoughtful gifts for everyone. I had even prepared my grandmother's famous chocolate pecan pie recipe to bring to dinner. I hoped this holiday would be a chance to reconnect, to remind my family that despite my busy life, they were still important to me. I never imagined that while I was dreaming of family togetherness, they were plotting behind my back. I arrived at my parents' suburban home at exactly 4 o'clock on Christmas Day. The trunk of my car was filled with carefully wrapped presents, each adorned with handwritten gift tags. The chocolate pecan pie was securely balanced on the passenger seat, still warm from the oven. I had spent the morning perfecting it, making sure the pecans were arranged in concentric circles, just like my grandmother used to do. My mother greeted me at the door with a quick hug. I noticed she seemed distracted, her eyes darting back toward the kitchen as she took my coat. The living room was decorated, as it had been every Christmas of my life. The artificial tree that was older than me stood in the corner, draped with multicolored lights, and the collection of ornaments my mother had accumulated over decades. The fireplace mantel was lined with Christmas cards and stockings hung in a row, one for each family member, including the newest addition for baby Lily, who had been born just 10 months earlier. My nieces Zoe and Sophie, ages 7 and 5, rushed over to hug me, their eyes bright with excitement. "Where did you park Aunt Yvonne?" Sophie asked, peering out the window. "Daddy said we might need to use your parking spot." I laughed, assuming it was child confusion. "In the driveway, sweetheart. Is Uncle James parking somewhere else?" Before she could answer, my father emerged from the hallway. "Yvonne, Merry Christmas." He gave me a hearty pat on the back. "The girls have been asking when you would arrive. They want to open presents." Amanda appeared from the kitchen, baby Lily on her hip. The toddler squirmed and reached for me with pudgy hands. "Hey, sis," Amanda said, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "Nice of you to make it." I took Lily into my arms, breathing in her baby scent. I noticed Amanda looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Her blonde hair, usually carefully styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her Christmas sweater had what looked like baby food stains on the sleeve. "How could I miss Christmas?" I replied, bouncing Lily gently. "I brought pie. And where is James?" "Working on something in Dad's office," Amanda said vaguely. "You know how they are with their projects." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. My mother enlisted my help in the kitchen, putting final touches on the meal. The turkey was golden brown, surrounded by roasted vegetables. A casserole of sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows bubbled in the oven. Cranberry sauce, both homemade and from a can because my father insisted both were necessary, waited in crystal dishes. Throughout the food preparation, my mother peppered me with questions about work, my condo, and conspicuously my storage situation. "Do you still have that big storage closet off the hallway?" she asked, as she vigorously mashed potatoes. "Yes," I replied, adding butter to the pot. "I actually had it fitted with custom shelves recently. Great for organizing." "And your guest bedroom? You still using that as an office? You work from home a lot." I sensed something off in her tone, but dismissed it. "Sometimes, though, I go into the office most days. The company prefers it for team collaboration." James finally appeared, greeting me with a nod rather than the usual hug. His handshake was firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. He had lost weight since I last saw him, his flannel shirt hanging loosely on his frame. The awkward small talk continued through the appetizers. I noticed subtle glances exchanged between my parents whenever certain topics arose. When I mentioned potentially taking an international assignment for work next year, my father nearly choked on his wine. Finally, dinner was ready and we gathered around the dining table. The conversation flowed more naturally as we focused on passing dishes and complimenting the food. The children provided welcome distraction with stories about school and friends. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I heard hushed voices coming from my father's office. The door was ajar, and I paused when I heard my name. "Yvonne won't know at first," my father's voice said. "We will tell her it's just for a couple of weeks until you get back on your feet." My mother's voice joined in. "She's never home anyway. Always working. That condo sits empty most of the time. and it's so big for just one person. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. What if she says no? James asked. Amanda said she just had the place renovated. She won't say no, my mother insisted. Family emergency, what can she do? Besides, once you're settled, it will be harder for her to kick you out. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Amanda spoke next, her voice lower than the others. Once the kids are enrolled in school in that district, she won't make us leave. She can't be that heartless. And if she complains, we remind her how we helped her through college, my father added. She owes the family. She can just get another place, she has the money, James said dismissively. Probably better for her to be closer to that office she loves so much anyway. So we agree, my father concluded. After New Year's, Amanda will call with the emergency, you move in temporarily, and nature takes its course. Yvonne doesn't need all that space, and you need a stable home for the kids. I must have made a sound because the conversation abruptly stopped. I quickly stepped into the bathroom and closed the door, my hands shaking. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, shocked at the paleness of my face. The family I loved, the people I trusted most in the world, were conspiring to take my home. After splashing cold water on my face, I returned to the dinner table with what I hoped was a convincing smile. As I took my seat, I observed my family with new eyes. My father, cutting his turkey into precise pieces, had just plotted to manipulate me out of my home. My mother, pouring gravy with a steady hand, had dismissed my hard work and success as irrelevant. My sister, wiping chocolate from her daughter's chin, had agreed to take advantage of my generosity and turn it into entitlement. I maintained my composure through the rest of dinner, through dessert, through the opening of presents. I exclaimed appropriately over the scarf my mother had given me and the coffee table book about Boston architecture from my father. I hugged my nieces and played peekaboo with baby Lily. I behaved as if my world hadn't just shattered, as if the foundation of trust I thought existed in my family hadn't crumbled beneath my feet. As I drove home that night, the Christmas lights of suburban houses blurred through my tears. I realized I had a decision to make. Would I confront them now, or wait to see how far they would take this plan? And more importantly, how would I respond when they did? The drive home from my parents' house that Christmas night was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Tears streamed down my face, making the road ahead blur dangerously. Twice I had to pull over to compose myself before continuing. The beautiful lights decorating houses along the way now seemed to mock the darkness I felt inside. By the time I reached my condo, my emotions had cycled through shock, hurt, and raw anger. I slammed my apartment door behind me and stood in the entryway, suddenly seeing my home through new eyes. This space that represented my decade of sacrifice and hard work, my parents and sister saw as something they could simply take from me because they decided I didn't deserve or need it. I walked through each room, touching the furniture I'd saved for the art. I'd carefully selected the books I'd collected. In my home office, I ran my fingers along the custom desk I'd commissioned from a local woodworker. The master bedroom featured the luxury mattress I'd splurged on after my last promotion. The kitchen contained the high-end cookware I'd gradually accumulated one piece at a time. Every square foot of this place represented a choice, an achievement, a dream realized. And my family thought they could just move in and push me out. Sleep evaded me that night. Instead, I found myself lost in memories, re-examining my childhood and relationship with Amanda through this new, painful lens. I remembered being 10 years old, saving my allowance for weeks to buy a special art set only to have my parents give it to Amanda when she cried about wanting it. I was told to be the bigger person, to share, to not be selfish. I recalled my high school graduation when my academic achievements were overshadowed by concern for Amanda, who was going through her first breakup. My scholarships were mentioned briefly before conversation turned to how to help Amanda feel better. I thought about my college graduation, which my parents nearly missed because Amanda had impulsively decided to go on a weekend trip and needed someone to watch her dog. They arrived just as the ceremony ended, full of apologies and explanations about traffic. Throughout the night, the pattern became clear. I had always been expected to give, to understand, to sacrifice. Amanda had always been expected to receive, to be protected, to be prioritized. And now they expected me to give up my home, my sanctuary, because Amanda and James had failed to create stability for their family. As dawn broke, my sadness gave way to clarity. I would not allow this pattern to continue. I would not sacrifice my home. But neither would I give them the satisfaction of an emotional confrontation where they could cast me as the villain, the cold career woman who refused to help her struggling sister. No, I needed a different approach. I spent that day researching the housing market in my area. To my surprise, I discovered that property values in my neighborhood had appreciated significantly in the 3 years since I'd purchased my condo. Similar units in my building were now selling for almost $750,000. The market was hot, with properties often receiving multiple offers within days of listing. With trembling fingers, I called Madison, a friend from college, who had become a successful real estate agent. "Madison, I need some advice," I said after exchanging pleasantries. "Hypothetically, how quickly could I sell my condo in this market?" Madison didn't question the hypothetical nature of my inquiry. She was used to friends testing the waters before making big decisions. "In your building with your renovations, you could list on Thursday and have offers by Monday," she said confidently. "But why would you sell? You love that place." I carefully explained what had overheard, my voice breaking occasionally despite my attempts to remain composed. "Those manipulative." Madison began before taking a deep breath. "Okay, let's think through this. What do you want to do?" I considered my options. I could confront my family, immediately tell them I'd overheard their plan and refused to participate, but that would lead to denials, tears, and accusations of my being selfish. They might even attempt to make me feel guilty for eavesdropping. I could wait for them to execute their plan, then refuse when they asked. But again, the emotional manipulation would be intense, and knowing my family, they would find ways to pressure me over time. Or I could allow their plan to unfold while secretly taking control of the situation. "Madison," I said finally, "I want to sell, but I want to do it quietly, and I need it to happen fast." The next week was a blur of activity. Madison arranged for a photographer to capture my condo at its best. I signed the listing agreement with a contingency that the sale would not be public until I gave final approval. Madison began quietly marketing the property to select clients she knew were looking in my area. Meanwhile, I began looking for a new place to live. Not just a new condo, but a new city. The betrayal had awakened something in me, a desire to truly start fresh. I researched job opportunities in my company's other offices and discovered an opening in the Seattle branch that would actually be a promotion. I contacted my manager and expressed interest in the position, explaining that I was considering a lifestyle change. She was supportive, especially when I outlined how my experience would benefit the Seattle office. A video interview was arranged for the following week. I also began the process of sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. Each item required a decision, and through this process I found myself shedding not just material possessions but emotional baggage as well. I rented a storage unit and gradually moved my most precious belongings there. Family photos were carefully packed away, not because I planned to display them again, but because I wasn't ready to discard that part of my history completely. Important documents, irreplaceable keepsakes, and my most valuable possessions found their way into secure storage. The condo began to look less personalized but still welcoming and well-furnished. I was preparing it for both potential buyers to view and for my family's temporary occupation. The irony of this dual purpose wasn't lost on me. By New Year's Eve, I had a plan in place, timelines established, and contingencies considered. While others celebrated the promise of a new year, I was preparing for a complete life reinvention forced by betrayal. As I sipped champagne alone in my condo that night, watching fireworks from my window, I made a resolution. This would be the year I finally established boundaries with my family. This would be the year I put myself first without guilt. This would be the year I turned their betrayal into my liberation. The ball dropped on television, and I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. "Happy New Year, Yvonne," I whispered to myself. "Everything is about to change." The call came exactly 16 days after Christmas, just as I had anticipated. I was at work reviewing code for a new project when my phone lit up with my sister's name. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. Yvonne Amanda's voice sounded tearful, exactly as rehearsed. I now realized, "I need to talk to you about something important." I gripped my phone tighter, summoning the acting skills I never knew I possessed. "What is it, Amanda? Is everything okay?" What followed was a performance worthy of an award. Amanda explained through strategic sobs that she and James had received an eviction notice. The landlord was selling their building, and they had 30 days to vacate. With James' unemployment, their savings depleted, and 3 children to consider, they had nowhere to go. "We tried everything," she insisted. "Mom and Dad would take us in, but they just don't have the space with their downsizing last year." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while silently noting how closely this emergency followed the script it overheard. "I hate to even ask this," Amanda continued, "but would it be possible, just temporarily, of course? Could we stay in your guest room? Just until we find a new place. The kids could sleep in the living room and we'd be so quiet you would hardly know we're there." I paused, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably as if considering the request for the first time. "That's a big ask, Amanda," I finally said. "I've got my home office in the guest room, and my place isn't really set up for kids." My parents called within the hour, as I knew they would. My mother was first, her approach subtly guilt-inducing. "Amanda is beside herself," she said. "I know it's not ideal, but family helps family in times of need. Remember when you were in college and needed money for books? Your father and I always found a way." My father was more direct. "Look, kiddo," he said, using the childhood nickname I once loved, now turned manipulation tool. "Your sister has 3 kids and nowhere to go. You have a 2-bedroom condo that you hardly use because you're always working. This is a no-brainer." I allowed them to pressure me for several days, occasionally raising practical concerns that they quickly dismissed. Finally, I reluctantly agreed, emphasizing that this arrangement would be temporary, perhaps a month or 2 at most. "Absolutely," my father assured me, "just until they get back on their feet." The following weekend became moving day. I had spent the previous week relocating my home office equipment to the company office and moving my most personal items to my storage unit. The condo looked spacious and welcoming, but no longer contained anything I couldn't bear to lose. Amanda, James, and the children arrived in a rented moving truck containing far more possessions than would be expected for a temporary stay. My parents followed in their SUV, equally loaded with boxes and bags. I greeted them in the building lobby, keycard in hand. My mother hugged me tightly. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. "This is what family is about." I helped them unload, watching as my carefully curated home was invaded. James immediately began rearranging the living room furniture to accommodate their television and gaming system. Amanda opened kitchen cabinets, commenting on how she'd reorganized them for better efficiency. The children ran through the rooms, excitedly claiming spaces. "Your office will make a perfect bedroom for the girls," Amanda said, already removing my desk chair. "And the master bedroom is big enough for us and the baby." "Wait," I said, feigning surprise. "I thought you would take the guest room and the kids would use the living room. Where am I supposed to sleep?" An uncomfortable silence fell. James looked at Amanda. Amanda looked at my parents. My parents looked at me with expressions of exaggerated confusion. "Well," my mother began carefully, "we thought, since you're so busy with work, you might prefer staying closer to your office during the week. You could get a small studio apartment maybe, or stay with friends. You have so many options, dear. And on weekends you could always visit my father," added quickly. The couch pulls out. Very comfortable. I forced myself to appear shocked, then resigned. I needed them to believe their plan was working. Swallowing my manufactured hurt, I nodded slowly. "I guess that makes sense," I conceded. "For the short term, until you find your own place." Over the next week, I watched as Amanda and James settled in as if they had no intention of leaving. They changed the Wi-Fi password, they had mail forwarded to my address, they rearranged the kitchen to their liking. They hung their family photos over mine. I moved into a short-term furnished apartment provided by my company for visiting employees. It was small but functional, and most importantly, it served my purposes perfectly. I told my family I was staying with a colleague, temporarily reinforcing their belief that I had conceded my home to them. Meanwhile, Madison had found potential buyers for my condo. A young professional couple had fallen in love with the property and offered $725,000, nearly $100,000 more than I had paid 3 years earlier. I met with my lawyer to review the sale contract and to ensure everything was legally sound. The closing date was set for 3 weeks away, with a provision that the current occupants, a vague term that technically included Amanda and her family, would vacate by that date. The Seattle job opportunity had progressed as well. After 2 interviews, I received an offer with a significant salary increase and relocation bonus. The position would begin in 1 month, perfect timing for my escape plan. Each night in my temporary apartment, I monitored the security camera I had discreetly installed in my condo's main living area. I watched as my family made themselves increasingly at home. James propped his feet on my coffee table. Amanda used my expensive face creams. My parents visited frequently, beaming with satisfaction at their successful plan. One evening I observed a particularly revealing conversation. The children were in bed and the adults sat in my living room drinking my collection of wine. "I still can't believe this worked," James said, refilling his glass with my limited edition Cabernet. "I was sure Shed put up more of a fight." "Yvonne has always been reasonable," my father replied. "She understands family comes first." Amanda laughed, a sound that once brought me joy, now revealing her true character. "Plus, she's never here anyway. She practically lives at that office. This place was wasted on her." "We should start looking at schools for the kids," my mother suggested. "The district here is excellent." "Already done," Amanda said smugly. "I've got registration paperwork for next semester, and I've told our landlord we won't be renewing our lease." As I watched this scene unfold on my laptop screen, I felt a strange calm replace my initial anger. These people were not behaving as family. They were opportunists who saw me only as a resource to be used. The decision I had made was not just justified, it was necessary. The next day, I received the signed purchase agreement from the buyers. The condo was officially sold, contingent only on the final walkthrough and closing paperwork. Madison called to congratulate me, her voice mixed with concern for my emotional state. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "You could still back out. Find another way to deal with your family." "I appreciate your concern," I replied, "but I've never been more certain of anything. This isn't just about the condo anymore. It's about setting boundaries that should have been established years ago." 2 days later, I received confirmation that my Seattle position was finalized. My new apartment there had been secured. My future was taking shape, a future free from exploitation and manipulative family dynamics. It was time for the final act of my plan to unfold. 3 weeks after Amanda and her family moved in, I suggested we have dinner together at the condo. A family meal, I said, to check in on how everything was going. My parents eagerly accepted the invitation, no doubt hoping to further cement the arrangement. I arrived early that Friday evening, carrying bags of groceries and a forced smile. Amanda greeted me with casual ownership of the space that had once been mine. The condo had transformed in my absence. My minimalist decor had been replaced by chaotic family living. Toys littered the floor. Cartoon character bedsheets hung in the bathroom. Fingerprints marked the walls. The sophisticated home I had created was unrecognizable. I prepared dinner in what had once been my pristine kitchen, now cluttered with plastic sippy cups and mismatched dishware. As I chopped vegetables, James lounged on my couch feet, propped on my coffee table, watching sports on a television that hadn't been there before. Mom and Dad arrived, bearing a housewarming gift, not for me but for Amanda and James. "A framed family photo to hang in your new home," my mother explained, not even attempting to maintain the pretense that this was a temporary arrangement. We gathered around my dining table, the one I'd saved for months, to purchase from an artisan furniture maker. The conversation flowed around me as I remained mostly silent, observing the comfort with which they had settled into my life. "We should repaint the master bedroom," Amanda said between bites. "That gray is too depressing. I was thinking a nice yellow." "Great idea," my mother agreed. "Brighten the place up a bit." "And that office space needs better storage for the girls' toys," James added. "I could build some shelves next weekend." My father nodded approvingly. "The place is really coming together. Feels more like a home now." I took a long sip of water, swallowing my rising anger along with it. How convenient that Id created this beautiful space they could simply take over. "Have you talked to the school counselor yet?" my mother asked Amanda. "For enrolling the kids." "All set for next semester," Amanda replied. "Zoe is excited about their science program and Sophie can walk to dance classes after school. The location is just perfect." "Speaking of location," James interjected, "I told the landlord yesterday we definitely won't be renewing our lease. No point in paying rent when we're settled here." My parents exchanged pleased glances. My mother reached over to pat my hand. "It really worked out for the best, don't you think? Your little studio is closer to work and the family gets to use this space properly." Actually, my father added, "We were thinking maybe you should just transfer the utilities to Amanda's name. Good for her credit, you know, and more convenient since you're not really living here anymore." I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on dessert. In reality, I needed a moment to compose myself. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't even pretending this was temporary anymore. In their minds, they had successfully orchestrated my displacement from my own property. Standing in the kitchen, I made the final decision. It was time. I returned to the dining room with a bottle of champagne and 5 glasses. I smiled as I began pouring. "I think we should celebrate," I announced. Amanda looked pleased. "Celebrate what?" "New beginnings," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Harris to change and fresh starts." We clinked glasses. As they sipped, I reached into my purse and withdrew an envelope. I placed it on the table, my hand lingering on it for a moment. "What's that?" my father asked, eyeing the envelope. I sat back in my chair and took another sip of champagne, savoring the moment. The deed transfer and closing documents for this condo. The confusion on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "What do you mean, deed transfer?" Amanda asked, her champagne glass frozen midway to her lips. "I sold the condo," I said simply. "Closing is next Friday. The new owners take possession the following Monday." Silence descended on the table. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in disbelief. Amanda broke first. "You," what she shrieked. "You can't do that. We live here now." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "It's my name on the deed, my property to sell." "But we had an agreement." James slammed his glass down, champagne sloshing onto the tablecloth. "You said we could stay." "I said you could stay temporarily." I emphasized the last word. "I'm fairly certain I never agreed to give you my home permanently, despite what you all planned." My mother's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Christmas dinner," I said, looking directly at her. "I overheard everything in Dad's office. The plan to move Amanda in temporarily, and then make it impossible for me to ask you to leave. The discussion about how I don't need all this space, James' comment that I can just get another place." The shocked expressions confirmed what I already knew. They never expected me to discover their scheme, let alone counter it. "You were eavesdropping," my father blustered, attempting to shift blame. "That's a violation of privacy." I laughed, a genuine sound of disbelief. "I'm violating your privacy when you were literally plotting to take my home." Amanda began to cry, her go-to tactic when confronted. "Where are we supposed to go?" she sobbed. "You can't just throw us out on the street, we have children." "You have exactly 10 days to find new housing," I stated. "The same amount of time you gave me to vacate my own home. The difference is I'm giving you legal notice." "This is ridiculous!" James stood up, his face reddening. "You can't sell a property with tenants without notice." "You're not tenants," I countered. You have no lease, no rental agreement, and have paid no rent. Legally, you're guests who have overstayed their welcome. My father attempted a different approach. Now, Yvonne, let's talk about this reasonably. If it's about money, we can work something out. Maybe James and Amanda could pay you rent. It's not about money, I replied. It's about respect. It's about years of being taken advantage of. It's about the fact that not one of you considered how I would feel about being manipulated out of my own home. My mother reached for my hand, her eyes pleading. Sweetie, we were just trying to help Amanda and the kids. You know how hard they've had it. We didn't mean to hurt you. I gently withdrew my hand. Mom, you didn't think about me at all. None of you did. You saw something I worked hard for, decided I didn't deserve it or need it, and took it for yourselves. Amanda's sobs grew louder. The kids love it here, she wailed. They finally feel stable. The emotional manipulation that had worked so effectively throughout my life now fell flat. I stood up, gathering the envelope. The decision is made, I said firmly. The condo is sold. I suggest you start packing. You can't do this to us, James shouted, his fist hitting the table. Well, fight this. We'll talk to a lawyer. Feel free, I replied, my calm unshaken. But I recommend you spend that energy finding a new place to live instead. My father stood now too, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, by throwing your sister and her children out. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the words that needed to be said. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? When have you ever put my needs first? When have you ever supported my choices the way you've supported Amanda's? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. I never wanted it to come to this. I continued, my voice softer but no less determined. All I ever wanted was to be valued as much as Amanda, to have my achievements celebrated, to have my boundaries respected. Instead, you conspired to take the one thing I worked hardest for. You're choosing a building over family, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't raise you to be so cold. I'm not choosing a building over family, I corrected her. I'm choosing self-respect over exploitation. And for the record, I didn't sell it to hurt you. I sold it because I accepted a promotion in Seattle. I'm moving next month. This new information stunned them into silence. The realization that I had completely reclaimed control of the situation slowly dawned on their faces. I gathered my purse and jacket. I'll be staying at Madison's until I leave for Seattle. I suggest you use the next 10 days to find alternative housing and pack your belongings. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned. As I walked toward the door, Amanda made one last desperate attempt. You can't just walk away from us. We're your family? The only family you'll ever have. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and turned to face them one last time. Family doesn't scheme behind each other's backs. Family doesn't take without asking. Family respects boundaries and celebrates success instead of exploiting it. I hope someday you learn what family truly means. With those words, I walked out of my condo and closed the door firmly behind me. In the elevator, I leaned against the wall and took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my family without backing down. I had broken the pattern of sacrifice that had defined our relationship for decades. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be tears, recriminations, possibly even estrangement. But in this moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My phone began ringing before I even reached Madison's apartment. By morning, I had 55 missed calls, 37 text messages, and 23 voicemails, all from various family members. The digital bombardment continued throughout the day, reaching such intensity that I eventually turned off my phone completely. Madison, bless her heart, became my buffer and sanctuary. She made breakfast, kept the coffee flowing, and offered both practical advice and emotional support. She never once suggested I reconsider my decision, understanding better than most how long this confrontation had been coming. When I finally turned my phone back on Sunday evening, the tone of the messages had shifted from anger and disbelief to increasingly desperate pleas. Amanda texted about the children, crying for their new home. My mother left voicemails describing in detail how devastated everyone was. My father sent emails outlining all the ways I was destroying the family. Not one message contained an apology. Not one acknowledged their role in creating this situation. They remained steadfast in their belief that I was the villain in this story. On Monday morning, I returned to work, throwing myself into preparations for my transfer to Seattle. My supervisor was supportive, excited even about my upcoming role. The familiar routine of coding and meetings provided welcome structure amid the emotional chaos of my personal life. At lunch, I received a call from the building concierge. "Your parents are in the lobby," he informed me. "They insist on seeing you." "Please tell them I'm in meetings all day," I replied. "And Ryan, could you make sure my family doesn't gain access to the building in my absence? I'm concerned about potential confrontations." That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to review the final closing documents and confirm that everything was legally sound. He assured me that while my family might threaten legal action, they had no grounds to contest the sale. I had never signed any agreement. Verbal contracts about residency would be nearly impossible to prove, and as the sole owner, I had every right to sell the property. By Wednesday, my family had escalated their campaign. Amanda posted a lengthy diatribe on social media about selfish siblings and homelessness, carefully constructed to garner maximum sympathy without mentioning any specifics that would reveal their plan. Friends and extended family members began reaching out, concerned about what they were hearing, asking for my side of the story. I maintained a dignified silence publicly. To those closest to me, I explained simply that there had been a misunderstanding about temporary housing that had revealed deeper family issues. I neither defended myself vigorously nor attacked my family in return. The truth I had learned had a way of revealing itself over time. Thursday brought a new tactic. My parents appeared at my workplace lobby, telling the receptionist it was a family emergency. Fortunately, I'd already alerted security about potential disruptions. They were respectfully but firmly turned away. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Yvonne Henderson, a male voice, inquired. Speaking, I replied cautiously. "This is Michael Brewer. I represent Amanda and James Lewis in a potential tenant rights case. I understand you've sold property currently occupied by my clients without proper notice." I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. My lawyer had prepared me for this possibility. "Mr. Brewer, I'm afraid your clients have misrepresented the situation. They are not tenants. There is no lease agreement, no rent has ever been paid, and they were explicitly told the arrangement was temporary. Furthermore, they have been given more than the legally required notice to vacate." The lawyer hesitated before continuing. "My clients claim they were promised long-term residency and have made life changes based on that understanding. I suggest you ask your clients for documentation of that promise," I replied evenly, "and perhaps question why, if this was meant to be a permanent arrangement, no formal agreement was ever proposed or signed. I have evidence that they plan to move in temporarily and gradually make it impossible for me to reclaim my property." Another pause. What kind of evidence? Recorded conversations outlining their plan in detail. I bluffed. I had no such recordings, but they couldn't know that. "Would you like me to have my attorney forward those to you?" "That won't be necessary at this time," he backpedaled quickly. "I'll need to consult further with my clients." I recognized the call for what it was, another intimidation tactic, likely encouraged by my father, who had a friend in real estate law. The lawyer probably realized after speaking with me that this wasn't the easy case he'd been led to believe. Friday morning brought the official closing. I signed the final paperwork transferring ownership of my condo to the young couple who had purchased it. They were excited about their new home, planning renovations and discussing furniture placement. Their joy should have made me sad, a reminder of what I was losing. Instead, I found it reassuring. My beloved space would belong to people who would appreciate it, not those who felt entitled to take it. As I handed over the deed, Madison squeezed my hand supportively. The chapter was officially closed. That evening, I received an email from my mother different in tone from all previous communications. The subject line read simply, "Where will you stay?" The message inside was brief, stripped of the emotional manipulation that had characterized her earlier attempts. "Your father and I have discussed the situation. While we disagree with your decisions, we recognize that Amanda and James need to find alternative housing. They will be moving back in with us temporarily. The children are understandably confused and upset. If you wish to say goodbye to them before you leave for Seattle, you may come by Sunday afternoon." It was as close to a concession as I was likely to get. The invitation, though wrapped in continued disapproval, was at least an acknowledgement of reality. They had accepted that the condo was sold and that their plan had failed. I spent that weekend with Madison and other people who supported my decisions without qualification. We celebrated my upcoming move with dinner at my favorite restaurant. They presented me with going-away gifts, a Seattle guidebook, rain boots, a gift card for a famous coffee shop. For the first time in weeks, I laughed genuinely and felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. Sunday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The moving truck in the driveway confirmed that Amanda and her family were indeed relocating there. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage for what would likely be a difficult encounter. My father opened the door before I could knock. His face was a mask of restrained anger and hurt. He stepped aside wordlessly to let me enter. The living room was cluttered with boxes and bags. The children were watching television, subdued compared to their usual energy. Zoe, the oldest, looked up at me with confusion in her eyes. "Are you still mad at us, Aunt Yvonne?" she asked innocently. My heart constricted. "I'm not mad at you, sweetie," I assured her, kneeling to her level. "Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that have nothing to do with the kids they love." Amanda entered from the kitchen, baby Lily on her hip. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression caught between anger and defeat. "Mom said you'd be coming," she said flatly. "I wanted to say goodbye to the kids before I leave," I replied. "I'm moving next week." Seattle Right James appeared in the hallway, leaning against the wall with forced casualness. Convenient timing. The accusation in his tone was clear. He believed I'd manufactured the job opportunity to justify selling the condo rather than accepting that I'd pursued the opportunity as part of reclaiming control of my life. My mother emerged from the back bedroom. "Well, the guest room is ready for you all," she told Amanda, pointedly ignoring my presence. "It will be tight but well managed." The calculated snub was meant to hurt me, to reinforce that I had damaged the family beyond repair. Once, it would have worked. I would have apologized, tried to fix things, sacrificed my needs for family harmony. But that pattern was broken now. I spent 20 minutes with my nieces and nephew, reading them a story, explaining in simple terms that I was moving for an exciting job opportunity. I promised video calls and care packages. I hugged them tightly, memorizing their small faces, uncertain when I'd see them again. As I prepared to leave, my father followed me to the door. "Your mother is heartbroken," he said quietly. "We never thought you'd choose money over family." I turned to face him, maintaining calm in the face of this final manipulation. "Dad, I didn't choose money over family. I chose self-respect over being exploited. There's a difference." He shook his head, unable or unwilling to understand. "We raised you better than this." His words were meant to shame me, to trigger the guilt that had controlled me for so long. Instead, they clarified everything. "Maybe one day you'll realize that teaching your daughters to respect themselves and others would have been better than teaching one to take and the other to give until there's nothing left," I replied. I left without another word, closing the door gently behind me. In my car, I didn't cry as I had expected to. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace, of completion. A toxic cycle had been broken, painful as the breaking had been. The drive back to Madison's apartment was quiet. My thoughts turned toward the future rather than the past. Seattle represented not just a new job and home, but a fresh start unburdened by decades of unhealthy family dynamics. For the first time in my adult life, I would make choices based solely on my own needs and desires without the weight of inappropriate family expectations. As difficult as this confrontation had been, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice, not just for my present peace, but for my future happiness. 6 months later, I stood at the window of my Seattle apartment, watching raindrops race down the glass as the city lights twinkled through the mist. My new home was smaller than my Boston condo, but perfectly suited to my needs with an incredible view of Puget Sound and the distant Olympic Mountains on clear days. The transition hadn't been easy. Moving across the country meant leaving behind friends' familiar routines and the city I'd called home for over a decade. The first few weeks in Seattle had been lonely, filled with awkward introductions and the disorientation of new surroundings. I found myself reaching for my phone to text family members about small discoveries or achievements, only to remember our estrangement. But gradually, day by day, I built a life that felt increasingly authentic. My role at the Seattle office proved to be challenging and rewarding. I was respected for my expertise and given opportunities to lead projects that showcased my skills. 2 months after my arrival, I received another promotion, this one recognizing my ability to improve team coordination and efficiency. My apartment slowly transformed from an impersonal space to a true reflection of myself. I was more intentional this time, selecting each piece of furniture and decor, not based on trends or expectations, but on what brought me joy. The living room featured a comfortable reading nook overlooking the water. The kitchen contained only tools I actually used. My bedroom was a sanctuary of calm blues and soft textures. Most importantly, I began to form genuine connections. My team at work included several people close to my age with similar interests. We started meeting for happy hours on Fridays, which led to hiking trips on weekends, book club gatherings, and dinner parties. These weren't just colleagues, but potential friends who seemed to value me for exactly who I was. I also found a therapist, Dr. Karina Martinez, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. Our weekly sessions helped me unpack decades of complicated emotions and patterns. "You know, setting boundaries isn't selfish," she told me during one particularly breakthrough session. "It's actually an act of honesty. You're saying, 'This is who I am and this is what I need to be healthy and whole.'" Those words resonated deeply. For so long, I had equated setting boundaries with being selfish or unkind. In reality, my lack of boundaries had enabled unhealthy behavior and prevented authentic relationships from forming. Back in Boston, the situation had evolved in unexpected ways. Madison kept me updated occasionally, careful not to overwhelm me with family news unless I specifically asked. Amanda and her family had indeed moved in with my parents, creating tension in that household. The close quarters and financial strain tested relationships that had previously seemed unshakable. Surprisingly, it was Amanda who reached out first 3 months after I left. Her message was brief but significant. "We found a small rental house," she wrote. "James got a job at a construction company. The kids are adjusting to their new school. I think maybe I understand some things better now." It wasn't an apology, not explicitly, but it was an acknowledgement, a small opening that suggested potential for future healing. I responded with equal brevity, congratulating her on the new home and job, asking about the children. We exchanged messages sporadically after that, careful and cordial, neither of us mentioning the condo or the confrontation directly. My parents took longer. 5 months after my departure, a card arrived in the mail signed by both but clearly written by my mother. The message expressed hope that I was well in my new city and job. Like Amanda's message, it carefully avoided direct mention of our conflict, but the fact that they had reached out at all suggested a softening of positions. I called them on my mother's birthday, a brief conversation filled with surface-level pleasantries and careful navigation around sensitive topics. It wasn't warm or particularly comfortable, but it was civil, a possible foundation for something more genuine in the future. The experience had changed me fundamentally. I found myself speaking up in meetings when previously I might have remained silent. I declined invitations that didn't interest me without inventing excuses. I expressed preferences clearly, rather than defaulting to whatever would please others. These small acts of authenticity accumulated, creating a life that fit me better than the one I'd left behind. One rainy Sunday afternoon, nearly 7 months after leaving Boston, I received a video call from Zoe, my oldest niece. Amanda had given her permission to use her tablet for the call, a gesture of goodwill I appreciated deeply. Aunt Yvonne Zoe's face filled the screen, her missing front tooth creating a whistling effect as she spoke. "I lost my tooth and I got an A on my science project about plants." I listened attentively as she chattered about school friends and her younger siblings' antics. She gave me a virtual tour of their new house, proudly showing off her shared bedroom with space-theme wallpaper. Seeing her happiness and stability eased a lingering worry I'd carried about the impact of my decisions on the children. When Amanda appeared briefly at the end of the call, our exchange was cordial but meaningful. "You look happy," she observed. "Seattle must agree with you." "It does," I confirmed. "How are things really going for you all?" She sighed, a familiar sound that now carried new weight. "Better. Hard sometimes, but better. I think I understand some things now that I didn't before. About responsibility. About consequences." It was as close to an apology as Amanda could manage at this point, and I accepted it for what it was. A recognition of growth. A small step toward potential reconciliation. That night I sat on my balcony despite the light drizzle, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea. The city lights blurred through the rain, creating a watercolor effect that mirrored my reflective mood. The past 6 months had brought pain and loss, yes, but also clarity and strength I hadn't known I possessed. The betrayal that had seemed catastrophic had ultimately set me free. Free from expectations that were never mine to fulfill. Free from relationships based on what I could provide rather than who I was. Free to discover my own worth separate from my usefulness to others. I realized that family could be many things. It could be the people who share your DNA. It could be the friends who stand by you through difficult choices. It could be colleagues who celebrate your successes without resentment. It could be neighbors who check in during stormy weather. Family, I was learning, was defined by mutual respect and genuine care, not by obligation or manipulation. The condo that had represented such achievement and security had never been the true source of either. My sense of accomplishment came from within, from knowing I had worked hard and succeeded on my own terms. My security came not from walls and deeds, but from the boundaries I had finally learned to establish and maintain. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal railing of my balcony. I didn't retreat inside. Instead, I tilted my face upward, letting the cool drops mix with tears. I hadn't realized I was shedding tears, not of grief now, but of release and renewal. I had lost a condo, yes, and relationships had been damaged. But I had gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that I was strong enough to stand alone, wise enough to choose my connections carefully, and worthy of relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely follows a straight line, and family relationships are complex by nature. There would be difficult conversations ahead, boundaries to reinforce, old patterns to resist. But for the first time, I faced that future with confidence rather than apprehension. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't sacrifice. Sometimes it's standing firm in your truth and allowing others the opportunity to rise to meet you there. I had finally learned that lesson, painful as the teaching had been. As the rain subsided and stars began to peek through breaking clouds, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never again mistake exploitation for love or sacrifice for respect. The path forward might be uncertain, but I would walk it on my own terms, creating connections based on mutual care rather than obligation. And that, I realized, was the most valuable property I would ever own. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the moment, but ultimately led to personal growth? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of finding strength through challenging family situations. And if you know someone who might need encouragement to set healthy boundaries, consider sharing this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.